you wrote a beautiful piece for us, your first piece for the trio, the Shogun Trio.
Yeah.
Maybe, if you don't mind, tell us something
That was
about
how many years ago now? I believe that was almost 8 years. So 10 years, was it 10 years ago?
10?
It's, yeah, maybe that's so. Now, what's interesting about that was this particular piece, it's called the Shogun Trio because it's based upon several songs that were in the Broadway show that I wrote for James and with James Clavell called Shogun. Walter, you may have forgotten, the idea for this came from you.
No, I didn't forget.
Originally, I had received this kind commission to write a piece for what for me seemed like a baffling combination, violin, clarinet, and piano. Now, of course, I know the Mio Trio, and of course, violin and clarinet, you think about Bartók, but violin, clarinet, and piano, there are not a lot of pieces in that, for that combination. For one thing, for most composers, we'd find it that it has two treble voices and a piano. Of course, there's the Mozart piece for viola and clarinet. Now, those are two middle voices. So I had trouble thinking about how to write it. When I get commissions, I generally just don't sit down and churn out a piece, it's not allegro form or 12-tone or whatever. I have to have a kind of poetic idea of what I'm doing. And from the idea, generally the piece comes, if I have a good idea. But I couldn't for the life of me think of what to write for them. I tried to write pieces, but it was Walter who said, why don't I, and actually Shogun had not premiered yet. I was actually writing it at the time.
That's right.
And I was writing this piece for 10 years.
And you said you're so busy, so I thought, well, why not use something from the musical, because...
Well, and I remember thinking for a while, what a dumb idea, I don't think I'd do that. But like a lot of dumb ideas, when you live with them, they become good ideas.
And I thought that you'd probably write some nice tunes for the musical.
That's true. That's true.
We could profit from that.
Well, and I think it turned out to be a good idea, and we will profit from it. Someday we'll both retire, you'll see. Anyway, the musical eventually did find its way to Broadway, where it had 104 performances. That's considered a failure in Broadway terms, but I always thought it was a great success because Gershwin's Porgy and Bess had 104 performances on Broadway. And when you think about 104 performances, that's lavish when you think about the times we get commissions. Let's say the New York Philharmonic or somebody commissions you, they'll play it once, maybe twice, and that's it. It's wonderful to have a piece performed, and that's one of the good things about the Verdehr Trio is that they're very loyal to the people that write for them, and they record them and they bring them on tour, and they get more than one performance, in other words, and this helps get subsequent performances with other groups as well. But anyway, the Shogun Trio is based upon a couple of songs, ballads, love ballads. I'm writing on commission from you a concerto for violin, clarinet, and orchestra. And that's an unusual combination, I think you'll admit. Did Bruch write something like that?
Well, for viola and
that's
clarinet.
right. That's right.
I always think that viola is too much like the clarinet in sound.
I think so too.
And the violin has a little bit more.
Well, a lot more.
Difference, yeah.
It gives the brilliance that, like for example, in the viola concerto that I'm presently writing, the first and second movements were not a problem, but writing a third movement, one that flies, like everybody wants to write a beautiful, dashing finale, like a perfect example is the Mendelssohn concerto. But just try writing that on the viola, and the A string just doesn't fly the way the E string does, right? And it's not the facility of the player, it's the speaking capability of the instrument.
When did you actually get into the Hollywood?
Well,
and how?
That's
you were sort of in the avant-garde.
I was a member of the avant-garde. It's true, and for example, one of the musical directors of the Monday evening concerts in Los Angeles, along with Ingolf Dahl, and during the great days when there were these wonderful, Lawrence Morton was the head and so forth. And so certainly my reputation was in writing pieces like tree music and stuff. Very wonderful, as diaphanous pieces, anyway, very avant-garde. Well, in 1973, I resigned UCLA, my teaching position, and I pretty well walked away from contemporary concert music, which was really starting to bore me, frankly. And I cast myself into the freelance world, and almost immediately and simultaneously, I received 2 invitations. Within a year of resigning from my teaching position, I got an invitation to compose a ballet for the San Francisco Ballet, Shinju. And that eventually led to my being designated their composer in residence. For 10 years I held that position, many ballets for them, yes. But at the same time as getting this ballet commission, I received an offer from somebody I had never heard of named Roger Corman on Sunset Boulevard, who was doing a, he called it a hard R. He wanted an action picture, futuristic picture with electronic music, and it turned out to be Death Race 2000. It was the first Hollywood picture for Sylvester Stallone and a whole bunch of people. So almost simultaneously, I found myself in show business, writing for the stage and the screen. And I had no experience with it, whatever. But I was young and courageous, and so I managed to make my way. And so for the next 20 years, I was largely associated with movies. The ballet world actually led me to Broadway because Michael Smuin, who was the choreographer and artistic director at San Francisco, was asked to do a Broadway show based upon the music of Duke Ellington. The show had a choreographer and a music director, but the show was failing in its pre-Broadway run. So a whole new artistic crew was brought in, and it was the artistic team that had done The Tempest in San Francisco, and that consisted of myself as the composer, in this case arranger, Michael Smuin as director and choreographer, and Willa Kim, the costume designer, and Tony Walton, who had been doing a lot of work with Bob Fosse at the time, was brought in to do the sets. So, or to continue working on the sets. Anyway, the show of Sophisticated Ladies to music of Duke Ellington's with my arrangements and so forth, and Michael's choreography was a very, very big success on Broadway. And from there, I continued, that was my invitation to write Shogun. So from 1980, when that opened, until 1990, when Shogun opened, I was primarily associated with show business. Yeah. But I was taking the opportunity to write concert pieces, and one of them, or several of them, were for you. So that's the connection.
You had mentioned years ago a viola concerto for the Cleveland Orchestra.
That's right.
Is that...
That piece actually had problems. I finished the first, the piece did not have problems, but getting it performed had a problem. It was scheduled for a performance with Robert Vernon and with Ashkenazi conducting. But its first performance coincided with the first year of performance of Shogun. And I was also deeply involved with a television series which was very successful called China Beach. And for the first time I found myself torn apart by too many commitments. So I had to make a choice, and for good or evil, I chose to put off the viola concerto, and as a result, it's still on the table. But the first 2 movements are finished, and that's why I mentioned the third movement. The third movement, trying to write a light movement, not light, but a flowing Mendelssohn-like movement, which was my desire, is very difficult to pull off.
Is there any mainstream right now, or?
Well, that's a question I give a good deal of thought to recently, because I've been asked to return to UCLA after absence of 25 years as a visiting professor. And so when I teach younger people, I find myself trying to put into words the life that I've led and the life that I see being pursued by other composers. And I have to say, in the last 25 years, contemporary music has changed so radically, as has film for that matter. I mean, when I first started writing music for movies, there was no Quentin Tarantino, there was no those sort, and the same sort of radical change, of course, is happening in contemporary music. The single biggest thing, it seems to me, is the demise of the overwhelming control of the 12-tone and the Second Viennese School. That was, when I was a young composer, those styles were absolutely the strongest. And they were embedded in places like Tanglewood, the Frum Foundation, the various groups for contemporary music, especially in New York and so forth. Now that has changed radically. What would have been considered counterculture is now the dominant culture, it seems to me. Something that we now call loosely postmodernism, which would have been just considered Dada or fun stuff, or Laurie Anderson or whatever, is now considered very serious and studied seriously in universities. You can take courses in postmodernism that includes the work of Madonna and all the rest, you know.
Oh, really?
So I don't know if this is the new academism or what, but we have a fragmentation of styles that didn't exist before. And the younger composers are no longer reacting against the things that my generation reacted against. The battle has been won, it seems to me, about reestablishing tonality in serious contemporary music. Well, for example, this piece that I'm writing for you, this concerto for violin and clarinet. Now, I'm starting to get an idea there. And for the longest time, again, I wasn't sure how to deal with these two instruments. When you have two instruments, when you have a double concerto, the danger, it seems to me, is to have two people playing the same concerto. That is, you have one person play the theme, and then the other person play the theme, and then there's nothing left to do but to get into counterpoint, by which I mean imitation. And then if the orchestra imitates them, you get a kind of redundancy that works maybe in completely tonal music and works very well in romantic music, but it doesn't work for us, it seems to me, false. And I felt that I had to find a way in which the drama of two people standing in front of an orchestra presenting a musical argument or a dialogue to the audience would work. And for me, it suddenly occurred to me that the clarinet and the violin have very different traditions. To us, in the 20th century, the clarinet is not just the instrument that Brahms and Mozart loved, but it's an instrument associated with people like Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman and so forth. So you see which way I'm thinking already.
Absolutely.
Whereas we don't think about the violin necessarily. I know there's Stepan Grappelli and Giovannutti and so forth, but we still think of the violin as a very contemporary instrument without having to recall fiddle-faddle type roots. I'm thinking about Artie Shaw, like... that particular kind of... I have a kind of tune for the clarinet. The clarinet is playing a little bit on the rag side. Right? But the violin never plays that. The violin is playing something very... So we get the... So, you know, so we get...
Yeah.
What we're getting is two different... It's like two different personalities. Now, at some point, needless to say, I haven't finished the work. This is my idea of it. That the basic material is presented not only by two different instruments simultaneously, but they're two different ideas.
Yes.
It's like coming in on a dialogue, a play, let's say, by Edward Albee or something. Two people are talking, and in the process of their talking, we're finding out who they are.
Uh-huh.
It's not just what they're talking about, but how they're saying it and so forth.
Yeah.
And of course, you and Elsa have a very special relationship, personal and musical.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to incorporate some of that warmth into this. There's tension, there's humor, and also emotion, you know, some real emotions, it seems to me. And that you can get that if you're not being so formal. the orchestra will have even a third idea. I don't mean a third theme, but I have an idea for the orchestra, which is like a wonderful diaphanous texture, Debussy strings, very beautiful setting in which the setting, because even in a 2-character play, you have a set, you have lighting.
Right. That's right.
The orchestra sort of provides that so that they don't always have to be playing tune.
Mm-hmm.
They won't just be playing whole notes. Believe me, they'll be playing beautiful textures.
Yeah.
But there'll be textures that support the principal ideas that you and Elsa are playing. Right?
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Sounds fascinating.
Oh, it's going to be wonderful. Another masterpiece.
That's great.
I'm done.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Where's my check? No.
We're looking forward. We're looking forward to it.
Okay, this is what we do.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.